He laughed as he tightened the cuffs, thinking he'd just put another loudmouth in her place. But 5 minutes into court, she stood up, gave her full title, and pulled out the first of 10 witness reports with his name on it. What happens when the woman you arrested turns out to be the one investigating your badge? If that question hits you, go ahead and share your thoughts in the comments. We post stories like this every day, real powerful and true to life. So hit the like button, subscribe, and stay with us. Because what happens next will shake in the courtroom, and maybe even you. It started with a quiet drive through Westlake. Late afternoon, early winter. The sky was clear, the air dry, and the sun was dipping just low enough to cast that long golden stretch across the road. Simone Harper had just finished a full day of depositions and internal briefings at the U.S. Attorney's Office. She was tired, thoughtful, and headed home. Her car, sleek charcoal black, polished like a courtroom shoe, glided past the rusted mailbox clusters and cracked sidewalks. It wasn't a flashy car, but it was expensive, and in this neighborhood, that mattered. She saw the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror before she heard the siren. She exhaled, slowly. Hands at 10 and 2. She pulled over. The officer approached, fast steps, square shoulders, mirrored sunglasses. White male mid-40s, southern jawline, badge glinting under the fading light. License and registration, he said, voice tight like he was already in a fight. Simone responded evenly. Of course, officer. She handed them over, everything in order. Clean crisp. He didn't even look at them before tossing out his next line. That's a fancy ride for someone like you. Her eyes stayed forward. Calm. Is there a reason I've been pulled over, officer? That question, so measured, so professional, hit him sideways. Most people, when they asked that, had a tremble in their voice. A flicker of panic. But not her. Her voice was steady, her body still, her tone surgical. He stared at her, chewing his bottom lip. I'll be asking the questions. Step out of the vehicle. She didn't move, just turned her head slightly toward him. My license is valid. My registration is up to date. I'd appreciate knowing what I'm being stopped for. That did it. His ego cracked. The tone in her voice, it wasn't fear and it wasn't defiance. It was something else. Something that made him feel challenged. You're being uncooperative, he snapped. She raised one brow. I've answered every request. I've done nothing wrong. Out of the car, now. Still composed, she stepped out. Tailored navy slacks, low heels, no makeup, no noise. She moved like she belonged in a place he didn't understand. He opened the back door of his cruiser and grabbed the cuffs. You're under arrest. For what? He didn't answer, just said turn around. And she did. But just before the metal touched her wrists, she said it soft, low, and cold. You just made this bigger than you realize. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger. It was certainty. He paused for half a second, then clicked the cuffs shut anyway. He thought it was over. It hadn't even begun. The holding cell wasn't much, just 4 dull walls and a single bench bolted to the floor. But Simone Harper sat as if she were waiting for a car service, not locked up under fluorescent lights. She crossed her ankles neatly back, straight, her hands resting lightly on her lap. Nothing about her posture suggested fear or even irritation. She was composed, as if she had already factored this stop into her day. Outside the glass partition, Officer Cole Matthews couldn't stop glancing her way. There was something about the way she held herself, too still, too centered, that unsettled him. Most people in that chair were either loud pacing or slumped in resignation. But this woman, she looked like she'd been here before, and not from the side of the accused. He turned toward the sound of footsteps and saw Officer Luis Vega approaching, holding a few printouts in his hand. Vega had been around long enough to recognize when something felt off, and today his instincts were quietly ringing. I ran her plates, Vega said, lowering his voice. Car's clean, no priors, no outstanding anything. She owns a house in Brentwood, paid in full, registered under her name. Cole took the papers without looking at him, so Vega shrugged lightly. So, she's a federal employee. Justice Department. That made Cole glance up. Doing what? Vega shook his head. Doesn't say. Just lists DOJ in a clearance level. Pretty high. Cole stared through the glass again, his jaw tightening. She hasn't said anything. That's what's making me nervous, Vega replied. She's not panicking. She's not asking for her lawyer. She's just waiting. Simone shifted slightly on the bench, her eyes moving not frantically but attentively. She had already mapped out the layout of the room, noted the cameras, the clock above the door that was 6 minutes fast, and the way Officer Matthews had gripped her ID like he was holding a lie he didn't want to face. And as she sat there in silence, her mind drifted not toward fear but memory. 10 years earlier, in a conference room far more polished but no less cold, she had sat across from a hiring panel. 3 white men in dark suits, a woman with glasses too small for her face, and a polite but rehearsed rejection. "We appreciate your application, Ms. Harper. You are highly qualified, but we're looking for someone who better aligns with the culture of our team." She had smiled, nodded, and walked out of the room with her head high and a wound so clean it didn't bleed until she was alone. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "If the doors don't open, I'll stop knocking." But she hadn't stopped. Instead, she had learned to carve her own path through systems that weren't built for her. She had moved steadily through the ranks, taken the cases no one wanted, and investigated the people no one else dared touch. All the while, she remained careful, never reckless, never loud. Until now. Back in the cell, she heard muffled voices behind the glass. Cole and Vega. Something in their tone shifted. She didn't need to hear the words to know what was happening. They were starting to realize they didn't just detain someone, they had stepped into something bigger. Her thoughts returned to the file that still sat in her locked briefcase. It held internal complaints, disciplinary records, body cam transcripts, evidence of a disturbing pattern inside Crestwood PD, and the officer whose name appeared more than any other, Cole Matthews. She had been quietly building that file for months. She hadn't planned to confront him like this, not today, not like this. But sometimes life doesn't wait for the paperwork. She turned her gaze back to the reflection in the glass, locking eyes with Cole just for a second. His face was tense now, less sure. She wasn't angry, she wasn't smug, she was simply present. I didn't expect it to come to this, she thought. But maybe it was meant to. The courtroom was quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens just before something changes. No one looked up when the door opened, at least not right away. But they did when they saw her. Simone Harper walked in slowly, confidently, like she belonged there. She wasn't in a jail uniform, no handcuffs, just a sharp navy blue suit, heels that didn't make a sound, and a leather case tucked under one arm. Her hair was tied back, her face calm. She didn't scan the room. She didn't need to. She already knew exactly where everyone was. Cole Matthews was seated off to the right, just behind the prosecution table. When he saw her, his eyebrows drew in. He leaned forward, slightly confused at first, then uncertain. This wasn't what he expected. The woman he arrested had been quiet, composed, but forgettable, or so he thought. The woman walking into court now looked like someone he would have taken orders from, and that thought made him shift in his seat. Judge Morrison looked up from the file in front of her. "Ms. Harper, do you have legal representation today?" Simone stepped forward. She opened her case, pulled out a single folder, and met the judge's eyes. With the court's permission, she said clearly, "I'll be representing myself." That drew a few glances across the room. A subtle ripple in the air. "I am a federal prosecutor," Simone continued, assigned to the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. "And I currently have an open investigation into Officer Cole Matthews and his conduct during traffic stops and related incidents." The silence that followed wasn't just surprise, it was a shift in weight. Like the ground had tilted just slightly, but enough for everyone to feel it. Even the judge sat back in her chair. "You're actively investigating the arresting officer in your own case." "Yes, Your Honor," Simone said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. This arrest falls within the scope of an ongoing inquiry involving patterns of misconduct in this department. Across the aisle, Cole's hands gripped the edge of his seat. He glanced at the assistant city attorney, hoping for some signal, some kind of objection or defense. But nothing came. The room was too still. The judge looked at Simone carefully. "This is unusual, Ms. Harper. Are you sure you want to proceed without outside counsel?" "I'm sure," Simone replied. "Given the circumstances, I believe it's best that I speak for myself." Cole opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. She hadn't looked at him until now. But then she did. Her eyes met his, steady and unreadable. There was no anger in them, no triumph, no mockery, just truth. And that made it worse. It was the kind of look that said, "You don't know who I am, do you?" Not spoken, but heard loud enough to make him shift in his seat again. Simone turned back to the bench. "If I may, Your Honor, I'd like to begin by entering this into the record, my formal complaint filed 2 weeks ago against Officer Matthews regarding a series of traffic stops where his conduct raised legal and ethical concerns. Several of those stops involved black drivers who were searched or cited without clear cause. I have supporting documentation." She placed the folder on the desk before her, opened it, and slid one copy toward the clerk. Judge Morrison glanced at the file, her expression now serious. Cole didn't move. He couldn't. It was as if every assumption he'd made about that woman on the roadside was unraveling right in front of him, and he had no way to stop it. Simone didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She had shifted the room without ever breaking pace, and now every eye was on her. And none were on him. Simone stood at the podium, papers organized neatly before her. She didn't rush. She didn't grandstand. She simply began to speak. Your Honor, she said calmly, what happened during my traffic stop wasn't an isolated incident. It follows a pattern, one that has gone unchecked for years in this very department. She glanced briefly at the judge, then down at her notes. Her tone remained measured, but behind every word was weight-controlled, precise and steady. I'd like to enter into the record Exhibit A. She continued, lifting a document. An incident from March of last year involving a 17-year-old black student named Jamal Reed. She paused as the clerk took the document. Mr. Reed was stopped by Officer Matthews while walking home from basketball practice. No weapon, no contraband, just a backpack and earbuds. According to the officer's report, Jamal was moving suspiciously through a residential area. Simone raised her eyes to meet the judge's again. By suspicious, he meant black. Wearing a hoodie, carrying textbooks. Jamal was detained, questioned, and frisked on camera. No cause, no apology. A low murmur stirred in the gallery. The judge lifted a hand, gently signaling silence, but she didn't interrupt Simone. Simone nodded once and moved to the next file. Exhibit B, Tanya Wallace, a mother of 3, pulled over by Officer Matthews for a non-functioning taillight. Surveillance footage shows her brake lights were working at the time of the stop. Simone flipped the folder open, showing a still image. What wasn't noted in the officer's report was that Ms. Wallace was threatened with arrest when she questioned why her license was being scanned. Her children, ages 5, 7, and 10, were in the back seat. She looked up. They cried the whole way home. Cole's face tensed. He shifted, jaw clenched, eyes down. This isn't just bad policing, Simone said quietly. She let the words breathe in the silence. It's a pattern. That was when the city prosecutor stood. A well-dressed man with salt and pepper hair and a polished voice that echoed a bit too well in the courtroom. Your Honor, he said, while Ms. Harper's testimony is compelling, we must be careful not to conflate personal grievances with legal procedure. She is the one who was arrested. She is the one bringing this case. With all due respect, what we're hearing sounds like a personal crusade, an attempt to undermine a single officer based on a handful of incidents taken out of context. He glanced toward the gallery, then back to the bench. We should remain focused on the specific facts of the arrest at hand. There was a pause. Simone didn't move. She didn't object. She simply turned her head and looked at him. Her gaze was cool, direct. No anger, no emotion on the surface, but it held something deeper. Then she spoke slow, clear, and unshaken. This isn't personal, it's structural. The words hung in the air. This isn't about Officer Matthews alone, she said. It's about what happens when a badge is used as a shield and silence becomes policy. I've spent years investigating civil rights violations across multiple jurisdictions. I've seen how isolated incidents, when left unchecked, become habits. Then habits become culture, and culture becomes a wall. She took a step closer to the jury box, speaking not just to the judge now, but to the room itself. I'm not here to relive my arrest. I'm here because what happened to me fits into something much bigger and far more dangerous. She gestured gently toward the evidence table. What you see here isn't revenge, it's a record, and it's long overdue. For a moment, no one said anything. The courtroom once again shifted, less visibly this time, but deeper. The tension had moved from drama to truth. Even Cole could feel it, the weight of it settling in his shoulders. Simone didn't gloat. She didn't press further. She simply stepped back, returned to her table, and sat down without a sound. And though nothing had exploded, something had cracked. The courtroom felt heavier that morning, not louder, just more aware. People didn't just come to watch. They came to listen. And that's when Nathan Breyer arrived. He walked in like he had been there 100 times, which in truth he had. A senior prosecutor, sharp-measured, always dressed like a man who didn't need to raise his voice to win. Gray suit, gray tie, gray eyes. Nothing flashy, nothing careless. He gave a polite nod to Judge Morrison and placed his case files on the table. Then turned to Simone with a familiar smile, one of those smiles that says, I know exactly what you're trying to do. Miss Harper, he said, smoothly. I didn't expect to find you here, on both sides of the aisle. Simone didn't flinch. You'll find I move between roles just fine. Breyer's smile stayed, but his tone shifted. He turned toward the judge. Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to raise a concern. It speaks directly to the credibility of this proceeding and of the person at the center of it. Judge Morrison looked over her glasses. Go ahead, Mr. Breyer. He stepped forward slow and sure. As we've seen, Ms. Harper has positioned herself as a federal investigator, a complainant, and now her own legal representative. That's quite a lot of roles for one person in one courtroom. He let the words settle for just a moment. And while I don't doubt her sincerity, he added, I do question her objectivity, especially given her history. 3 years ago, she led the prosecution in People versus Mendoza, a case that resulted in a wrongful conviction. 14 months served before the defense uncovered withheld evidence Ms. Harper had access to. A quiet shift moved through the room. No gasps, just that subtle energy that says, this just got personal. Simone's expression didn't change, but her fingers curled slightly against the edge of the desk. Not from shock, from memory. Breyer continued, mistakes happen. I know that, but this courtroom shouldn't become a platform for redemption. Justice isn't a second chance for prosecutors. It's a first chance for the truth. He gave a small nod toward the jury box, then stepped back, hands folded neatly. Silence. Simone stayed seated. For a moment, she didn't speak. She let herself feel it. Not the sting of accusation, she'd lived with that already, but the weight of the past pressing up through the floor of the present. She remembered the mother's voice. I thought you were the one who'd protect him. She remembered standing outside the courthouse alone, long after the news vans had left. Then slowly she stood. I did fail, she said. No defense, no spin, just the truth. I missed something that should have been caught. And because of that, someone lost more than a year of their life. I won't pretend that didn't shape me. She paused, not for effect, but because she needed the breath. That's why I'm here now. Not to fix the past, but to make damn sure I don't let it repeat itself. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried. She turned, slightly speaking, not just to the judge now, but to every eye watching her. I didn't come here to settle a score. I came here because silence has a cost. I've seen it, I've caused it, and I won't be part of it again. The room was still, but it wasn't cold. People leaned in not because they were curious, but because they believed her. Even Breyer looked quieter. Simone returned to her seat. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. In that moment, it was clear she wasn't perfect, but she was real, and that mattered more. The courthouse emptied out by early evening. The lights dimmed, the voices faded, and the day folded in on itself. But Simone didn't go straight home. She stayed late in her office alone, flipping through the same pages she'd read a dozen times already. She wasn't looking for new evidence, she was looking for clarity, for resolve. That night, her inbox chimed. At first, she ignored it. Another update from the field office, she thought, but the subject line froze her hand. Back off, or we bring him down too. She clicked it open. Drop it, or your brother's record goes public. We both know how messy that was. Walk away, Simone, while you still can. There was no name, just an attachment, a scanned copy of an old arrest report. One she hadn't seen in years. One she thought was buried for good. Her chest tightened, not from fear, from history. She leaned back slowly, letting the silence settle. Her eyes stayed on the screen, but her mind was already somewhere else, years back in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and sweat. Her brother Marcus had been barely 20. Wrong place, wrong time. He was charged in a robbery he didn't commit. The prosecution pushed hard. No one looked twice at the holes in the story. Simone had just started law school, too green to help, too proud to ask anyone else to. He served 4 years before the truth came out, and even then the record didn't fully clear. The stain never left her family. Her parents stopped trusting the system. Marcus stopped trusting her, and she'd never quite forgiven herself for that. Now someone wanted to use that pain to shut her down. She sat there a long while, didn't cry, didn't rage, just let it hurt the way old wounds do, quietly deep in the places that never fully healed. The next morning, she met with an old colleague, Daniel Liu. They'd worked together on federal cases years ago. He knew her rhythm, her sense of justice, and her stubborn streak. He listened without interrupting, then leaned forward. Whoever sent that knows how to hit you, he said. Simone nodded. It worked. For a minute. You thinking of backing down? She looked at him, eyes steady but tired. If I stay silent again, what kind of prosecutor am I? Daniel didn't answer right away. Then he just said, the kind that's already made up her mind. Later that afternoon, Simone walked into the courtroom holding a sealed envelope. She handed it directly to the judge's clerk, then addressed the bench. Your Honor, I've received a threatening communication in relation to this case. The contents are personal in nature, but the intention is clear to pressure me into withdrawal by targeting my family. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you know who sent it? Not yet, Simone replied, but I've turned it over to federal investigators. She straightened her shoulders. I'm also submitting it into the record. A quiet murmur rose again. Even Breyer looked surprised. Judge Morrison flipped through the initial page, her face tightening. This changes the scope, the judge said softly, then louder. Given this development, I am formally referring the case to the U.S. Attorney's Office for oversight. This will now fall under federal jurisdiction for the remainder of proceedings. Cole looked stunned. The courtroom had already felt too big for him. Now it felt like it was collapsing. Simone didn't gloat. She just stepped back, letting the consequences fall where they needed to. Outside the courthouse, the wind had picked up. Cold, sharp. She paused at the top of the stairs and pulled her coat tighter. In her bag was a photo of her and Marcus from when they were kids. It wasn't there for sentiment. It was there to remind her why she couldn't stop. Not this time. The courtroom took a recess. Simone stayed behind talking with federal agents. Reporters buzzed around the hallway like hornets, throwing out questions no one was ready to answer. Cole slipped out the side door and walked to his cruiser. He didn't want to talk, didn't want to listen. He just wanted the silence to explain something he couldn't name. He climbed into the front seat, shut the door, and sat there a moment, hands on the wheel, not moving. Then, almost without thinking, he tapped the screen on his dash and pulled up the body cam footage from the arrest. He'd watched it once before, but not like this. The video started. There she was, Simone Harper, calm, composed, not resisting, not raising her voice. She handed him the license before he even asked. She asked polite questions. She never shouted. He watched himself, saw his own jaw tighten. He heard his own voice clipped, commanding, suspicious. Step out of the vehicle. Am I under arrest? Yes. No warning, no explanation. Just a decision already made. He watched as he yanked open the door. Watched as she stepped out, standing tall despite the cuffs. Watched how she looked at him like she was trying to see something he wasn't showing. And how he never looked back. The clip ended. The silence returned, but this time it felt heavier than before. He stared at the screen for a long time. The knock on his window startled him. Vega. She opened the passenger door and slid in, watching him carefully. You okay? He didn't answer. She glanced at the paused footage still glowing on the dash. You rewatching it? He nodded slowly. Vega hesitated, then said something that cut deeper than anything in court had. Do you even see her as human that day? The question hit like a slap. Cole blinked. He rubbed his face with both hands. I thought I was just doing my job. But were you, she pressed gently, or were you doing what you thought your job was supposed to be? He didn't know how to answer that. He looked out the windshield, saw people crossing the courthouse steps, protest signs, microphones, conversations about justice, all swirling around a case he thought would be over in 10 minutes. Vega's voice softened. She didn't yell, didn't fight. You put her in cuffs anyway. He nodded barely. I didn't think, he said quietly. I just assumed. It was the first honest thing he'd said all day. There was no big moment. No tears. Just a quiet crack in the armor. Small but real. Vega looked at him with something between pity and challenge. You want to fix this? She asked. Cole looked at her and for once didn't pretend he knew what that meant. I don't know how, he said. Start with not lying to yourself, she replied. Outside, a few reporters spotted them and raised their cameras. Vega turned away from the window. You ready to go back in? She asked. Cole sat there a beat longer. Then finally he nodded. But this time he wasn't walking back in as the officer who thought he knew it all. He was walking back in as someone who for the first time wasn't so sure. The courtroom was silent, not tense, not charged, just still. Simone stood at the front, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the table. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The strength came from somewhere quieter, the kind of strength that's been earned, not declared. She looked at the judge, then to the gallery behind her. A room filled with faces, some skeptical, some stunned, some with tears in their eyes. And she began. This was never about revenge, not for me. I've stood in courtrooms long enough to know that revenge and justice rarely walk together. She paused, swallowed. Not from nerves, but to hold back something deeper. This isn't about me winning. It's about stopping others from losing in silence. Because for every Simone Harper who gets to speak up, there are dozens who never get the chance, pulled over, dismissed, disrespected, and forgotten. This case was never just about a traffic stop. It was about a pattern, a mindset, a system. She turned just slightly, locking eyes with Cole, who sat motionless, his hands folded, gaze lowered. And for a brief second, there was no hate in her eyes, no triumph, only a quiet sort of grief. You didn't just misjudge me, Officer Matthews. You misjudged the seat you were sitting in. Power isn't the badge, it's what you do with it. The judge leaned forward. Thank you, Ms. Harper. She turned to Cole. Officer Matthews, do you wish to respond? He stood slowly, awkwardly, like he wasn't sure how to carry his own weight anymore. His voice was rough, uncertain. I don't know if anything I say now matters, he began. I thought I was doing my job. I see now. I wasn't even close. He looked at Simone. I'm sorry. And not just for what I did to you. No applause, no gavel bang, just breath being held. The judge finally looked down at her bench. After a pause that felt like it belonged in a different world, she spoke. This court finds that the arrest of Ms. Harper was unjustified. Officer Matthews is hereby suspended pending full departmental review. Furthermore, this court formally recommends immediate internal reforms within the Ash Grove Police Department, including but not limited to comprehensive anti-bias training and civilian oversight procedures. A ripple went through the courtroom, not a cheer but a release. A held breath finally exhaled. Then the judge added almost softly, the law exists for all, not just the loudest, not just the whitest. The words hung in the air like truth finally spoken aloud. Simone bowed her head slightly, not in triumph but in quiet recognition. She didn't smile. She didn't raise her arms. She simply gathered her papers, turned toward the gallery, and stepped down. People stood, some out of respect, some out of something they couldn't name. Reporters waited outside the courthouse doors, but Simone walked past them. She didn't need to speak to the cameras. Today wasn't about going viral. It was about making sure the silence didn't win. There were no flashing cameras the next morning, no victory speeches, no television crews waiting outside her door. Just the slow creak of her office chair, the soft shuffle of paper, and the faint ticking of the wall clock in Simone Harper's quiet office. The world had already moved on. She hadn't. Simone sat in her usual seat, still dressed in the same gray slacks and navy blouse from the night before. Her coffee was cold, her inbox full, but none of it felt urgent. She wasn't tired, not in the way exhaustion drains the body, but in the way only clarity can wear a person down. The kind that comes after you've spoken your truth and watched it echo in rooms you weren't supposed to stand in. She glanced at her calendar. Back to court next Monday. Another case, another fight. That was the reality of her work. Justice wasn't a mic drop moment. It wasn't applause or headlines. It was persistence, paperwork, long nights with no one watching. Then just as she was reaching for a new file, she noticed something out of place. A plain white envelope, no stamp, no name. It sat half hidden beneath a stack of folders like it had been slipped there quietly. Simone frowned, picked it up, and turned it over in her hand. The handwriting on the front was shaky, uneven, hesitant. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. Simone, you didn't just hold me accountable, you made me see. I used to think doing my job meant enforcing the rules. But the truth is I never really questioned who made the rules or why I enforced them the way I did. Watching the footage, hearing you speak, I didn't recognize myself. That scared me. I'm not writing for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know your words didn't fall flat. They stayed with me. I'm starting anti-bias training next week. On my own. I'm meeting with a community group downtown. It's not redemption, but it's a start. Cole Matthews. Simone read it once. Then again, she didn't smile. She didn't cry. She didn't react the way people might expect. Instead, she folded the letter carefully and slid it into the drawer on her right. Not because it needed to be saved, not because she planned to read it again, but because it mattered that someone had taken the time, even if he was part of the problem, even if it had come too late. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes lingering on the edge of the desk. The hum of the city outside was constant sirens in the distance, footsteps on the pavement, the buzz of life resuming. And yet in here, everything was still. Her phone lit up with a new voicemail, another request for an interview. She ignored it. She had no interest in being a symbol. No need to stand behind podiums or trend online. Let others tell stories about heroes. She knew better. Justice isn't a spotlight. It's not a headline. It's a choice made quietly day after day. It's the file you don't ignore, the email you send the wrong you refuse to let pass. Simone reached for a new case folder, straightened her posture, picked up her pen, and began again. Because justice wasn't something you won once and walked away from. It was something you lived. And while most people would never know her name, the people who needed her, they would remember. And that was enough. The seasons had shifted twice since the courtroom fell silent. The city moved on as cities always do, but something small had changed beneath the surface. It didn't happen with banners or breaking news. No parades, no speeches carved into granite. Just people, real imperfect people, choosing to walk a different path. On a gray Wednesday morning, Officer Cole Matthews stood in front of a semicircle of folding chairs at the Westside Community Center. He wasn't in uniform anymore. He wore a soft blue button-down sleeves, rolled up face a little more lined than the year before. The people sitting across from him were men and women who didn't trust cops. Some had stories that matched Simone's. Some had stories that hurt even more. Cole cleared his throat, adjusted the mic, and began. Before we talk about policy or law, let's talk about assumptions. The kind that sit in your gut so long you forget they're there. I used to think I was just doing my job, until someone held up a mirror and I didn't like who I saw. He didn't mention Simone by name. He never did. But in every session, he taught her voice echoed between the lines. It shaped his words, held him accountable even now. Across the city, in a glass-paneled auditorium flooded with morning light, Simone Harper stepped up to a wide wooden podium. The Reform Now National Conference had gathered legal experts, judges, students, and community leaders from across the country. Her face was calm. Her notes were tucked away untouched. She didn't need them. We talk about justice as if it's a verdict, a finish line. But what if it's a direction, a practice, something we have to choose again every single day? The room was silent, not in tension, but in attention. She continued, "A year ago, I stood in a courtroom not just to defend myself, but to confront a system I've spent my whole life inside. That confrontation didn't end with a ruling. It started a question. How much are we willing to change, and how much are we willing to lose to make sure the law protects everyone equally?" She didn't tell them everything. Not about the letter, not about the quiet way as she went back to work. But she didn't need to. Her presence was its own testimony, her resilience the case study. Back on the west side, Cole was finishing his session. One man in the back, maybe in his 40s, raised his hand. "So what now, officer? You teach this class and everything's fixed?" Cole shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "Nothing's fixed. But it's harder to walk the same path once you know where it leads. And it's harder to stay silent once someone's shown you the cost." He let the silence settle before nodding toward the exit. But the point isn't perfection. It's that we don't stop trying. He collected the handouts, packed his bag, and walked out under a pale afternoon sun. Elsewhere, Simone stepped away from the podium. A young woman approached her, a law student, nervous and eager eyes bright with questions. Simone listened, smiled, offered a few gentle words, and moved on. There was more work to be done, always. That night across the city, Simone sat by her window watching lights blink across the skyline. She thought about the past year, the long hearings, the quiet victories, the people she couldn't help, and the ones she did. At the same time, Cole stood before a mural freshly painted on the side of the precinct he once called home. It showed a winding road, jagged and steep, flanked by faces of all colors, all ages, all walks of life. No badges, no uniforms, just people. At the center, someone had painted a single phrase, "Justice doesn't shout, it listens." Cole traced the edge of one letter with his finger, then stepped back and let it be. They didn't see each other again. They didn't need to. Because somewhere in the same city, under the same sky, two people who once stood on opposite sides of a courtroom had chosen the same direction. Not because it was easy, but because someone had to. And maybe, just maybe, that's how change really begins. Not with the loudest voice, not with applause, but with a quiet choice. A decision to walk, to keep walking, even when no one is watching. Voiceover soft and steady. Justice isn't a destination. It's a direction. And they're both still walking. If this story moved you even just a little, take a moment to let it sit with you. Because Simone's journey isn't just about one woman standing up in court. It's about what happens when we refuse to stay silent, when we choose courage over comfort, and when justice becomes something we live, not just something we wait for. If you believe stories like this matter, stories that dig deeper, ask harder questions, and remind us what humanity really looks like, then please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more powerful, heartfelt tales like this one. Every comment, every view, every bit of support means the world to us. It helps our small team keep creating stories that challenge, inspire, and bring people together, one voice at a time. Thanks for walking this journey with us. And remember, justice isn't always loud, but it always matters.